You know that feeling when you're lying in bed at 2 a.m. and your brain decides it's the perfect time to calculate exactly how many years you'll be making car payments? Or when you're standing in the grocery store checkout line and suddenly you're doing mental math to figure out if buying name brand pasta will somehow derail your entire financial future? Maybe you've experienced that moment when your phone buzzes with a bank notification and your heart rate spikes before you even read what it says. If any of this sounds familiar, you're definitely not alone. What you're experiencing isn't just regular stress or occasional worry about money. You're dealing with something much deeper and more complex that affects millions of people but rarely gets discussed openly. It's called money anxiety, and it's probably affecting your life in ways you never even realized. Most people think money problems are purely mathematical. They believe if you just earn more, spend less, or follow the right budgeting system, everything will magically fall into place. But here's what nobody talks about. Your relationship with money was programmed into your brain long before you ever earned your first paycheck. The way you think, feel, and behave around money has almost nothing to do with logic and everything to do with psychology. If you've ever wondered why smart, capable people make seemingly irrational financial decisions, or why you can know exactly what you should do with your money but still find yourself doing the opposite, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that like button if this information helps you understand yourself better. Today, we're going to explore the hidden psychology behind money anxiety that affects over half of all Americans, but remains largely invisible because nobody wants to admit they're struggling. We'll uncover why your brain treats financial threats exactly like physical dangers, how childhood experiences shape your adult money behaviors in ways you never suspected, and why traditional financial advice fails so spectacularly for people dealing with money anxiety. Most importantly, you'll discover that feeling anxious, overwhelmed, or even traumatized by money doesn't make you weak or broken. It makes you human. Let me start with a statistic that might shock you. According to recent research, 54% of Americans feel stressed or anxious about their personal finances at least 3 days every week. Think about that for a moment. More than half the population is walking around carrying this burden of financial stress multiple times per week. But here's the part that's even more concerning. 87% of people experience financial stress at least once every week, and most of them don't feel comfortable talking about it with anyone, including close friends and family members. This creates what researchers call a silent epidemic. Millions of people are suffering from money-related anxiety, but because everyone assumes they're the only ones struggling, nobody discusses it openly. You might look around at your coworkers, friends, or neighbors and think everyone else has their financial act together while you're the only one lying awake at night worried about bills. The truth is, most of them are probably having the exact same experience you are. They're just really good at hiding it. What makes this even more fascinating is that money anxiety doesn't discriminate based on income levels. You might assume that people earning six-figure salaries don't worry about money, but research shows that even high earners report significant financial stress. This tells us something crucial about the nature of money anxiety. It's not primarily about the actual numbers in your bank account. It's about your psychological relationship with money, your sense of control over your financial future, and deep-seated beliefs about security and survival that operate below your conscious awareness. The generational patterns are particularly revealing. Generation Z experiences more intense financial stress compared to older age groups, with 62% saying they're stressed about money more than 3 days per week and 20% feeling financial anxiety every single day. Millennials and Generation X aren't far behind, with 58% and 61% respectively experiencing money anxiety at least 3 days per week. These aren't just numbers on a survey. These represent real people losing sleep, avoiding social situations, and making life decisions based on financial fear rather than financial planning. But here's where things get really interesting from a psychological perspective. Your brain doesn't actually distinguish between financial threats and physical threats. When you're worried about paying rent, stressed about credit card debt, or panicked about an unexpected car repair, your nervous system responds exactly the same way it would if you were being chased by a predator. Your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, triggers the same fight or flight response that helped your ancestors survive life-threatening situations. This means that when you're experiencing money anxiety, your body floods with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. Your heart rate increases, your breathing becomes shallow, your muscles tense up, and your digestive system shuts down. All of this happens automatically below your conscious control because your brain has classified your financial situation as a survival threat. The problem is that unlike our ancestors who could run from a saber-toothed tiger and then relax once the danger passed, financial stressors tend to be chronic and ongoing. Your nervous system stays activated for weeks, months, or even years at a time. This chronic activation of your stress response system creates a cascade of physical and mental health problems that extend far beyond your bank account. People experiencing ongoing financial stress report higher rates of anxiety, depression, sleep disorders, digestive issues, headaches, and cardiovascular problems. Your immune system becomes compromised, making you more susceptible to illness. Your cognitive function declines, making it harder to think clearly and make good decisions. Ironically, the stress response that's supposed to help you survive financial threats actually impairs your ability to solve financial problems. Research has identified specific inflammatory markers in the blood of people experiencing chronic financial stress. These same markers are associated with heart disease, diabetes, and other serious health conditions. Your body is literally trying to protect you from financial danger, but in the process, it's creating real physical damage that can affect your health for years to come. This is why addressing money anxiety isn't just about improving your financial situation. It's about protecting your overall well-being and quality of life. The psychological impact goes even deeper when we consider how financial stress affects your relationships and social connections. Money anxiety creates a tendency toward isolation because people feel ashamed of their financial struggles and assume others won't understand. This isolation cuts you off from the social support that could actually help improve both your financial and emotional situation. You might avoid social activities because you can't afford them, decline invitations because you're embarrassed about your financial situation, or withdraw from friendships because talking about money feels too vulnerable and exposing. Financial stress also creates what psychologists call decision fatigue. When you're constantly worried about money, every purchase becomes a complex calculation that burns mental energy. Should you buy the generic cereal or splurge on the name brand? Can you afford to put gas in your car? Or should you walk to work this week? Is it worth paying the extra $2 for organic vegetables? Or should you stick with conventional produce? These micro decisions pile up throughout the day, leaving you emotionally exhausted and mentally depleted. This decision fatigue explains why people experiencing financial stress often make seemingly irrational choices. When your mental resources are depleted from constant worry and calculation, you don't have the cognitive bandwidth left to make optimal long-term decisions. You might skip the free financial planning workshop because you're too tired to process new information, avoid dealing with bills because thinking about money feels overwhelming, or make impulse purchases because your willpower is completely exhausted from managing financial anxiety all day long. The most profound aspect of money anxiety is how it shapes your identity and sense of self-worth. In our culture, financial success is often equated with personal value, intelligence, and moral character. When you're struggling financially, it's easy to internalize those struggles as evidence that you're somehow inadequate or deficient as a person. This creates a toxic cycle where financial problems generate shame. Shame increases anxiety, anxiety impairs decision-making, and poor decisions create more financial problems. Understanding this shame-based cycle is crucial, because it reveals why traditional financial advice often fails so spectacularly for people dealing with money anxiety. When someone tells you to just create a budget and stick to it, they're completely ignoring the psychological forces that drive your financial behavior. They're treating money anxiety like a math problem when it's actually an emotional and neurological problem that requires a completely different approach. The roots of money anxiety often trace back to childhood experiences that most people never connect to their adult. Children are financial struggles like psychological sponges, absorbing messages about money from their families, communities, and cultures long before they understand what money actually represents. If you grew up in a household where money was scarce, you might have developed what psychologists call a scarcity mindset that persists even when your financial situation improves as an adult. But here's what makes childhood financial programming so insidious. You don't have to experience poverty directly to develop money anxiety. Children pick up on financial stress through their parents' behavior, tone of voice, and emotional reactions around money topics. Maybe your family had enough money to meet basic needs, but your parents constantly fought about finances or expressed anxiety every time bills arrived in the mail. Those early experiences created neural pathways in your brain that still influence how you respond to money situations decades later. The concept of financial trauma helps explain why some people have such intense reactions to money-related situations that seem disproportionate to the actual circumstances. Financial trauma occurs when someone experiences overwhelming money-related stress that exceeds their ability to cope effectively. This can happen through sudden events like job loss, bankruptcy, or foreclosure, but it can also develop gradually through chronic exposure to financial instability or watching family members struggle with money. What's particularly fascinating about financial trauma is how it can be passed down through generations, even when the original traumatic events happened before you were born. If your grandparents lived through the Great Depression and passed down beliefs about money being scarce and dangerous, those beliefs can influence your parents' financial behavior, which then shapes your own relationship with money. You might find yourself hoarding money or feeling anxious about spending even when you have plenty of resources, not because of your own experiences, but because you inherited trauma responses from previous generations. Research shows that people who experienced adverse childhood experiences have significantly more difficulty managing money as adults, even when controlling for income and education levels. This isn't because they lack intelligence or willpower. It's because trauma literally rewires the brain in ways that affect decision-making, risk assessment, and emotional regulation. The parts of your brain responsible for rational thinking and long-term planning become less active when you're in survival mode, while the emotional centers become hyperactive and drive impulsive behaviors. This neurological reality explains why someone might know exactly what they should do financially, but still find themselves making choices that sabotage their long-term goals. Their rational brain understands that paying off credit card debt is more important than buying new clothes, but their traumatized brain interprets any form of deprivation as a threat to survival and drives them to seek immediate comfort through spending. Traditional financial advice fails these individuals because it assumes their brains are operating normally when they're actually stuck in chronic survival mode. The behavioral finance research reveals just how irrational human beings become when money is involved, even when trauma isn't a factor. Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman demonstrated through simple experiments that people feel the pain of losing money approximately twice as intensely as they feel the pleasure of gaining the same amount. This phenomenon, called loss aversion, explains why investors hold on to losing stocks too long, why people avoid making beneficial financial changes that involve short-term costs, and why the fear of potential financial loss often paralyzes people into complete inaction. Kahneman's research showed that this loss aversion affects everyone regardless of wealth level. When he offered wealthy executives the chance to win $20,000 or lose $10,000 on a coin flip, they refused the bet, even though the expected value was clearly positive. The emotional impact of potentially losing $10,000 outweighed the rational analysis that suggested taking the bet would be profitable over time. This same psychological bias affects everyday financial decisions in subtle but powerful ways. Consider how loss aversion might influence your approach to investing for retirement. The fear of potentially losing money in the stock market might cause you to keep all your savings in low-yield savings accounts, even though you logically understand that inflation will erode your purchasing power over time. Your brain prioritizes avoiding the potential pain of investment losses over maximizing long-term gains, leading to financial decisions that feel safe in the short term but are actually quite risky over decades. Another powerful psychological bias that affects financial behavior is something called mental accounting. This refers to the tendency to treat money differently based on where it comes from or what it's intended for, even though money is fundamentally fungible. You might carefully budget your regular paycheck, but spend a tax refund or bonus impulsively, as if that money has different properties than your earned income. Or you might carry credit card debt at 18% interest while keeping money in a savings account earning 2%. Because you've mentally categorized the savings as untouchable emergency funds, even when using them to pay off debt would save significant money. The herd mentality represents another psychological force that drives financial anxiety and poor decision-making. Humans have a deep evolutionary need to belong to groups and conform to social expectations, which can lead to financially destructive behaviors when everyone around you is making similar mistakes. If your social circle normalizes carrying credit card debt, buying expensive cars on payment plans, or living paycheck to paycheck despite high incomes, you might adopt these same behaviors without questioning whether they align with your actual financial goals. Social media has amplified the psychological pressure to keep up with others financially in ways that previous generations never experienced. You're constantly exposed to curated highlights of other people's lives that make their financial situations appear more glamorous than they actually are. Someone posts photos from an expensive vacation without mentioning they charge the entire trip to credit cards they can't afford to pay off. Another person shares pictures of their new car without revealing the 7-year loan payment that's stretching their budget to the breaking point. This constant exposure to others' apparent financial success creates what researchers call financial comparison anxiety. You start measuring your financial worth against highlight reels that don't represent reality, leading to feelings of inadequacy and pressure to spend money you don't have on things you don't actually need. The irony is that the people whose lifestyles you're trying to emulate might be experiencing the exact same financial anxiety you are, but their social media presence creates an illusion of financial confidence and success. The confirmation bias adds another layer of complexity to money anxiety by causing people to seek out information that confirms their existing beliefs while ignoring evidence that contradicts them. If you believe you're terrible with money, you'll notice every financial mistake you make while dismissing evidence of your financial competence. If you believe investing is too risky, you'll focus on stories about market crashes while ignoring decades of historical data showing long-term investment growth. This selective attention to information that confirms your financial fears can trap you in cycles of anxiety and inaction that prevent you from making positive changes. You might avoid learning about investing because you're convinced you'll lose money, missing opportunities to build wealth over time. Or you might procrastinate dealing with debt because you believe your situation is hopeless, allowing interest and penalties to compound and actually make the problem worse. The familiarity bias represents yet another psychological trap that keeps people stuck in financial anxiety cycles. Your brain naturally gravitates toward financial choices that feel familiar and safe, even when those choices are objectively harmful to your long-term financial health. You might keep all your money in checking accounts because that's what your parents did, avoiding investment opportunities that could significantly improve your financial future simply because they feel foreign and uncomfortable. This bias explains why people often repeat the same financial mistakes their families made for generations. If everyone in your family has carried credit card debt, struggled to save money, or avoided investing, those patterns will feel normal and natural to you, even if they're preventing you from building wealth. Your brain interprets familiar financial behaviors as safe, regardless of their actual impact on your financial well-being. The emotional gap phenomenon reveals how your current mood and stress level dramatically influence your financial decision-making in ways you probably don't realize. When you're feeling anxious, angry, or overwhelmed, your brain shifts into a completely different mode of processing information. The rational, analytical parts of your mind become less active, while the emotional, impulsive centers take control of your choices. This means that the financial decisions you make when you're stressed about money are likely to be fundamentally different from the choices you'd make when you're feeling calm and confident. You might agree to expensive payment plans when you're panicked about a car repair, sign up for credit cards with terrible terms when you're worried about unexpected expenses, or make impulse purchases when you're feeling anxious about other areas of your life. Understanding this emotional gap is crucial because it helps explain why people often make financial choices they later regret. Your stressed brain isn't defective or irrational. It's actually operating exactly as evolution designed it to operate when facing survival threats. The problem is that modern financial challenges rarely require the same quick, instinctive responses that helped our ancestors survive physical dangers. When your nervous system is activated by financial stress, your brain prioritizes immediate relief over long-term consequences. This might lead you to use credit cards to cover expenses you can't afford, take out payday loans with devastating interest rates, or cash out retirement accounts early to deal with current financial pressures. These decisions provide temporary emotional relief, but often create much larger financial problems down the road. The concept of financial trauma becomes even more significant when we consider how it affects your nervous system's ability to regulate itself during money-related situations. Trauma literally changes the structure and function of your brain, making it more reactive to perceived threats and less able to engage rational thinking when triggered. If you've experienced significant financial trauma, your brain might interpret routine financial tasks like paying bills or checking account balances as dangerous situations requiring immediate fight or flight responses. This neurological rewiring explains why some people experience physical symptoms like rapid heartbeat, sweating, nausea, or panic attacks when dealing with money-related tasks. Their bodies are responding to financial situations as if they were life-threatening emergencies, even when the actual circumstances are manageable. Traditional financial advice telling them to just calm down and think rationally completely misses the neurological reality of what's happening in their brains. Financial trauma can also manifest through avoidance behaviors that seem puzzling from the outside, but make perfect sense when you understand the underlying psychology. Someone might avoid opening bills, checking account balances, or filing tax returns, not because they're lazy or irresponsible, but because their traumatized nervous system has learned to associate these activities with overwhelming emotional pain. The avoidance provides temporary relief from anxiety, but it also prevents the person from gathering the information they need to improve their financial situation. Bills pile up unopened, late fees accumulate, and problems that could have been managed early become genuine financial crises. This creates a self-fulfilling prophecy where avoiding financial tasks because they feel dangerous actually makes the financial situation more dangerous over time. Another common manifestation of financial trauma is hypervigilance around money, where someone becomes obsessively focused on tracking every penny they spend while simultaneously feeling constantly anxious about their financial security. They might check their bank balances multiple times per day, research every purchase exhaustively before buying anything, or hoard money even when they have more than enough to meet their needs comfortably. This hypervigilant state is emotionally exhausting and can actually impair financial decision-making by creating so much anxiety around money that the person becomes paralyzed by analysis. They might spend hours researching the perfect investment strategy, but never actually invest anything because no option feels completely safe. Or they might delay necessary purchases like car repairs or medical care because spending any money triggers intense anxiety about financial security. The intergenerational transmission of financial trauma represents one of the most profound aspects of money anxiety that most people never consider. Your great-grandparents who lived through the Great Depression might have passed down financial survival strategies to your grandparents, who passed modified versions to your parents, who unconsciously transmitted those same patterns to you. You might find yourself hoarding resources, avoiding debt even when it would be financially beneficial, or feeling anxious about spending money on anything beyond basic necessities without understanding why these responses feel so automatic and necessary. These inherited trauma responses can persist for decades after the original financial threats have disappeared. You might earn a comfortable income and have substantial savings, but still feel constantly worried about financial catastrophe because your nervous system has been programmed to expect financial danger. Your rational mind knows you're financially secure, but your emotional brain operates from programming that was installed generations before you were born. Cultural and societal factors add another layer of complexity to financial trauma by creating environments where certain financial behaviors are normalized even when they're harmful. If you grew up in a community where carrying debt was considered normal, where people regularly borrowed money from each other to make ends meet, or where financial planning was seen as something only wealthy people did, those cultural messages become part of your financial identity. The shame in many cultures can actually intensify trauma responses by financial struggles in acknowledging their difficulties, preventing people from seeking help, or even stigma surrounding. When financial success is equated with moral worth and personal value, struggling with money becomes not just a practical problem, but an identity crisis that threatens your sense of self. This cultural programming explains why people often feel intense shame about financial difficulties, even when those difficulties resulted from circumstances beyond their control. Someone who loses their job due to economic downturn might feel personally responsible for their financial struggles, as if their unemployment reflects some character flaw rather than broader economic forces. The intersection of financial trauma with other forms of trauma creates particularly complex psychological patterns that traditional financial advice completely fails to address. Someone who experienced childhood abuse might have learned that having resources makes them a target for exploitation, leading them to unconsciously sabotage their financial success to maintain a sense of safety. Or they might associate financial dependence with vulnerability and develop compulsive self-reliance that prevents them from accepting help or making sound financial partnerships. Research reveals that people who experienced adverse childhood experiences are significantly more likely to struggle with financial management as adults, regardless of their income or education levels. This isn't because trauma survivors lack intelligence or motivation. It's because trauma affects the development of executive functioning skills like impulse control, long-term planning, and emotional regulation that are essential for effective financial management. The hyperarousal and hypoarousal states that characterize trauma responses create particularly challenging obstacles to financial stability. During hyperarousal, someone might make impulsive financial decisions driven by anxiety and urgency. They might quit jobs without backup plans when workplace stress becomes overwhelming. make panic purchases of emergency supplies they don't actually need, or invest in get-rich-quick schemes that promise rapid financial security. During hypoarousal states, the same person might become completely paralyzed around financial decisions, unable to take even basic steps to improve their situation. They might leave money in checking accounts earning no interest because researching investment options feels overwhelming. Avoid applying for better jobs because the application process seems impossibly complex, or delay dealing with debt because the problem feels too large to address. These alternating states of financial hyperactivity and paralysis create chaotic patterns that prevent consistent progress toward financial goals. Someone might have periods of intense budgeting and saving followed by episodes of complete financial neglect, leading to cycles of progress and regression that feel confusing and discouraging. The body keeps score of financial trauma in ways that affect physical health long after the original traumatic events have passed. Chronic financial stress creates persistent inflammation in the body, elevating markers like C-reactive protein and interleukin-6 that are associated with heart disease, diabetes, and other serious health conditions. Your immune system becomes compromised, making you more susceptible to infections and slower to recover from illnesses. Sleep disturbances are particularly common among people experiencing financial trauma, creating a vicious cycle where poor sleep impairs cognitive function and emotional regulation, making it even harder to make good financial decisions. You might lie awake at night, running through worst-case financial scenarios, calculating and recalculating numbers that never seem to add up to security. The digestive system often bears the brunt of chronic financial stress, with many people experiencing stomach problems, acid reflux, or irritable bowel syndrome during periods of financial difficulty. Your body is literally digesting itself from the inside out in response to money-related anxiety, creating physical symptoms that can persist long after financial situations improve. Understanding these mind-body connections is crucial because it reveals why addressing financial anxiety requires more than just learning better money management skills. You can't think your way out of trauma responses that are stored in your nervous system and expressed through your physical body. Healing financial trauma requires approaches that work with the whole person, addressing both the practical and the psychological aspects of your relationship with money. The concept of financial resilience represents a completely different approach to money anxiety that focuses on building your capacity to handle financial challenges rather than trying to eliminate all financial risks from your life. Instead of viewing financial security as having enough money to never worry about anything, financial resilience involves developing the emotional, psychological, and practical skills to navigate financial uncertainty with confidence and stability. This shift in perspective can be incredibly liberating for people who have spent years trying to achieve perfect financial security, only to discover that no amount of money feels like enough when your nervous system is programmed to expect financial danger. Building resilience means learning to tolerate uncertainty, developing multiple strategies for handling financial challenges, and cultivating a sense of agency and competence around money management. Financial resilience also involves understanding that financial challenges are a normal part of life, rather than evidence of personal failure or inadequacy. Every person experiences unexpected expenses, economic downturns, job changes, and other financial disruptions throughout their lifetime. The goal isn't to prevent these challenges from occurring, but to develop the skills and mindset needed to handle them effectively when they arise. This resilience-based approach recognizes that your relationship with money is fundamentally about your relationship with uncertainty, control, and survival. When you can tolerate not knowing exactly what your financial future will look like while still taking appropriate steps to prepare for various possibilities, you've developed a level of psychological flexibility that serves you far better than any specific financial strategy or dollar amount in your bank account. The development of financial resilience begins with recognizing that your current money behaviors aren't character flaws that need to be fixed, but rather adaptive responses that once served a protective function. Your brain developed these patterns for good reasons, even if they're no longer serving your best interests. When you approach your financial psychology with curiosity rather than judgment, you create space for genuine transformation instead of just temporary behavior modification. This compassionate approach is revolutionary because most people spend years fighting against their financial tendencies, creating internal conflict that actually increases anxiety and makes lasting change more difficult. When you're constantly battling your own instincts around money, you're essentially waging war against your nervous system, which is exhausting and ultimately counterproductive. Instead of trying to force yourself into financial behaviors that feel completely foreign to your system, Financial resilience involves working with your psychology rather than against it. This might mean starting with incredibly small financial changes that don't trigger your threat detection system, gradually building tolerance for financial uncertainty, and developing personalized strategies that account for your unique trauma history and nervous system responses. The process often involves what therapists call pendulation, which means moving slowly between states of financial activation and calm rather than trying to maintain perfect emotional equilibrium around money topics. You might notice that checking your bank balance creates anxiety, so instead of avoiding it completely or forcing yourself to check it daily, you practice checking it when you're feeling relatively calm and then immediately engaging in activities that help regulate your nervous system. This pendulation approach helps retrain your brain to associate financial tasks with safety rather than danger. Over time, activities that once triggered intense anxiety responses become more manageable as your nervous system learns that engaging with money doesn't actually threaten your survival. The key is moving at a pace that challenges you slightly without overwhelming your capacity to cope effectively. Understanding the psychology behind your money anxiety isn't just about satisfying curiosity. It's about reclaiming your power to make financial decisions from a place of awareness rather than unconscious programming. You now know that your relationship with money was shaped by forces far beyond your control, from evolutionary survival mechanisms to childhood experiences to intergenerational trauma patterns. But here's the most important thing to remember. Awareness is the first step toward freedom. Once you understand why your brain responds to money the way it does, you can start working with your psychology instead of against it. You're not broken, defective, or doomed to repeat the same financial patterns forever. You're human, dealing with a perfectly normal response to living in a world where financial security feels increasingly elusive. If this video helped you understand yourself better, make sure to like it and subscribe for more content about the hidden psychology that shapes our financial lives. Your future self will thank you for starting this journey toward financial healing today.